Hey guys, what's up? It is Ripe again, back with another crossover between Entitled People and r/Revenge, focusing on awful neighbors. If you haven't already, please don't forget to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/ripeyoutube for exclusive Reddit content such as Just No Mother-in-Law stories. Without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled, Rotten Neighbor Moves In, Making Demands About Washer and Dryer Machines. A few years ago I lived in a 3-unit complex. I lived on the first floor with my roommate. We had new neighbor move into the second, who I will refer to as Andy. The day I met her, her husband knocked on my door. He told me Andy was in the basement and she wanted to talk to me. I thought, okay, that's weird, so I go to the basement and see Andy sitting on her ass with a toothbrush scrubbing our clothes dryer. She looks effing livid and starts screaming at me about how filthy the dryer was and that it was covered in oil. What she did not know was that my roommate works operating machinery for a military gun manufacturer and that is his washer and dryer. I patiently let her finish this 10-minute rant and then say, well, first of all, that is not your dryer, it is ours and we can do whatever we want with it. Second, we don't have to let you use it if we don't want to. She apologized and I went back to my unit. However, that was not the end of it. 4 months after she continued to be a monster and possibly the worst human being I've ever met in my life, she was loud, abusive to her husband and we can hear her screaming all the time. She would purposely stomp on the ground at 8 AM when we were trying to sleep because we worked night shifts. She would take our wet clothes out of the wash and dump them on the basement floor and then proceed to wash her own. She was just a miserable, rotten, manipulative person and there was never a reason for it. One day she pounds on my door again, I answer it, of course it is Andy, and she's complaining about the dryer again, livid, screaming, name calling. I was bored so I rolled my eyes and said, you know what? F it, you are not to use our washer and dryer anymore, F you. I go downstairs and take her wet clothes mid-wash and throw them on the ground. I reach in the back and unplug both machines, so what is her response? Well, she calls the police of course. 2 cops show up knocking on my door, I tell them what happened and that it is our washer and dryer. The cops were confused and asked, wait, did you call the police? I said, no, she's just a effing dumbass and might as well have called the cops on herself. So they tell Andy that she cannot use our equipment if we don't want her to and went on their way. Luckily we were moving out soon. Me and my roommate decided we didn't want to bring the washer and dryer with us on our move. Knowing that Andy couldn't wait to use them again, I decided to snip the plugs on the back of both machines so that she could not use them. I unscrewed the back panel and snipped those wires as well for good measure. I still think about her going downstairs with a load of laundry after we had left and trying to turn on the machines. And I gotta say guys, this Andy person just reeks of entitlement. However, the way OP handled this was absolutely genius if you ask me. In addition guys, I would like to remind you of one thing, and that is, if you are subscribed already to my channel, then I would suggest to also click the bell icon to not miss any of my videos. Basically, clicking the bell will mean that you get extra notifications from my channel, and as you know, I don't really spam you or anything, so you will just get reminded of my uploads. Thank you so much in advance. And the next one is titled, Neighbor Won't Stay Off My Property, Gets Fenced Out. A little background, my current place is a fairly new build, backs to some woods and was empty for a bit before we moved in. My neighbor has a corner lot, also backs to woods, but is a bit odd shaped since the woods are considered protected green space. Because of this situation, they had used maybe a third of my backyard when they did outdoor activities, volleyball, badminton, etc. None of this bothered me because their kids are really nice and respectful. Fast forward a couple of years and I am having the backyard renovated. Well, the neighbor apparently had an issue with this because he kept bothering the crew during construction. Telling them what they could and couldn't do, saying they were too loud or doing things wrong, and claiming that I had asked him to oversee the crew. Spoiler, I did not. Eventually, the head contractor has had enough and complains to me about the micromanagement. I go talk to the neighbor and he's acting like he's doing me a huge favor by keeping them in line, but agrees to back off. And he does for about 2 days. I get an alert on my ring on a day the crew is off, and there was my neighbor on my patio picking up, inspecting and throwing down some pavers that had already been laid. I tell him to kindly get the F off my property and he proceeds to flip me off and walk back to his place. So now it is time for the petty revenge. When we first moved in, I had a whole house natural gas generator put in because power outages are common when thunderstorms roll through. Thing about those is they are loud when they turn on, and since we were doing the renovation, I planned on putting a living fence in across from the generator to mute some of the sound that would travel to his place. Well, I talked to the head contractor and we happily agreed to shift the trees from the generator down to the woods and essentially cut off his property from my property. Neighbor was not happy about that move and called the city surveyor to dispute the property line. But my contractor had made sure that we were fully on my property with about 8 inches to spare to account for tree growth. So the end result, neighbor is pissed but powerless. I have some nice trees to look at in the backyard and there's nothing to stop the symphony of my generator when it kicks on every week to do a status check. Edit, this got bigger than expected. Quick edit based on the comments. The neighbor, despite the a-hole behavior, is not a threat to my property. The renovation was finished last year and he has not retaliated at all. I do have video coverage on the generator side of the house and can see when folks enter the area, so we are covered there. Thanks for reading. And guys, I'm curious, how common are power outages where you live? I gotta say, here in Thailand it is actually not that common as some of you might expect. However, when I lived in the north of Thailand, it definitely happened a few times per month. Interestingly enough, usually a whole district would be without power. Either way, let me know about your experiences in the comments. And the next one is an XXL story from user Stacy Rose on our own subreddit, and it is about church drama, which we did not have in a while, and it is titled "The Time My Church Tried to Marry Me Off at the Age of 14. Back when I was 14, my family was going to this weird church that I was very uncomfortable at. I would hate going to church there and we had to go there twice a week, Sunday and Wednesday night. I hated it and would always ask to be allowed to stay home, but was denied each time. Sometimes I would make up some kind of excuse saying I had tons of homework or something, but nothing worked. One Wednesday night we got to church and the creepy minister was saying something about how little girls, when mature enough, were to marry a nice Christian man and how they are meant to serve that man and give him children. It was some cringe-worthy stuff he was talking about and it made me feel real icky inside. I just wanted to leave there and go home. The service went on for over 3 hours and it was the most boring and cringe-worthy service I've ever been a witness to. When service was ending, all the people would line up to leave and talk to the minister on their way out. We were last in line to leave because of course we were sitting in the front pews. When we got to the doors exiting the church, the minister asked my dad how old I was. My dad told him my age and then the minister said, "Good, my son is 19, we need to talk about their marriage." My dad looked at him and said, "My daughter is only 14, she's too young to marry anyone." The minister then said, "No, she's the proper age to be married off, it's in the Bible. You have seen my son, he's a good Christian man and will make a woman out of your daughter. I will give you a call this week and we will talk about it further." And then he allowed us to leave. On the drive home, my siblings and I were quiet because we were tired and I could hear my parents in the front seat talking about what the minister said to them. My mom said, "You're not seriously thinking about allowing that man to marry off our daughter to his son, are you?" My dad then said, "Of course not, she's too young." I was happy that my parents said that and stopped worrying about it. When we got home, we had our dinner and nothing was said about it anymore. Fast forward 2 weeks later, it is now Sunday and we are in church sitting in our usual spot. Of course, us children are uncomfortable as always and cranky and not wanting to be there. My dad did tell my mom that he talked to the minister about the marriage thingy and told the minister his answer was no, and my mom agreed. We thought that was the end of it. Well, on Sunday the minister was talking some boring stuff like usual and then stops and calls me up to the front. I tried to slouch down in my seat and looked at my parents. My dad put his arm over me and shook his head no at me and then glared at the minister. The minister called up his son and then said, "My son Isaiah," yes, that is actually his name too, "has chosen his wife, but it seems the father of the wife he has chosen does not approve of this marriage." Then the minister said my name again and said, "And now Stacy's father is denying his daughter the chance to become a wife and mother. He's going against God's law." I started to cry and my dad got up, looked at my mom and us kids and loudly said, "We are leaving. We are not going to stay in a church that demands the marriage of my minor daughter. Come on kids, let's go home." Of course, us kids were happy to oblige and quickly got out of our seats, but the minister got angry and came down to us, grabbed my arm and started to drag me up front. I was crying and my dad was yelling. The people sitting around had all gotten up and were yelling at the minister to let me go. I remember lots of yelling and the minister spouting off about how it is God's law and how we are going against God and how we are denying his son the chance at a happy marriage. I remember lots of yelling and I remember seeing the son of the minister glaring at me with this look that I can only describe of as pure hatred. An older woman had grabbed me out of the minister's grasp and told me quietly, "Don't worry, honey, my son is a police officer and he's the one heading up front right now. You go with your family, my son will take care of this," and gently pushed me towards my parents. My mom rushed up to me and hugged me and hurried me outside to the car along with my siblings. My dad was still in the church yelling at the minister. While we were in the car, my mom kept looking out the window towards the church, worried about my dad. Soon there were 2 police cars that pulled up in the church parking lot and my dad came out. He got in the car and said, "We are never coming back to this church again. That man is insane and his son is just as bad as he is. Who does he think he is? The police are here. I guess from what that lady, Mrs. Smith, I think that's her name. She says she's been going there with her police officer's son because there's been a lot of complaints about the minister and his son trying to get underage girls to be married off." I guess today was the nail in his coffin. He's getting arrested. I'm sorry I brought you all here. I was told it was a good church. Let's go get ice cream and head home. Then he started up the car and we left that place and did head to the neighborhood ice cream shop. Dad bought each of us kids ice cream cones and he and mom got some sodas for themselves and we sat in the booth. Dad then said, "Let's get that place out of our minds and enjoy our treats," and he smiled at us. Later we found out that the minister, his son and some other male church members were arrested for suspected trafficking of minor girls. I think if I remember clearly it was on the news, but I don't know for sure. I think it was in the newspaper too. I do remember the town we lived in all talking about the scandal, and no matter where we went in town we would hear about it. Some other church members would come over to our house to give us their support, and when the adults were talking in the kitchen, us kids were out in the yard playing on our swing set. My siblings and I seemed to suddenly have many more friends than we originally had, but none of us kids knew what the parents were talking about. We were just happy to be able to play without going to that church again. It took a few months before the church had a new minister, a very nice old man and his wife who made going to church a better experience. The minister would let the kids go to what is called Sunday school that his wife taught, and it was so much better than listening to a boring sermon. We got to color and do crafts, although each week they had some kind of Bible theme to them, but it was still better than being in the church listening to the service. By the time all us kids got to go back into the church was when there was singing, and then soon afterwards church would end. I remember the new minister talking to my dad to apologize for what the other minister did, but my dad would tell him it was not his fault and we would head home. The new minister stayed at that church for years and going there was so much better than before. I remember back then I was so confused to what was going on and always tried to be quiet about it for fear of getting in trouble. I think that was the scariest time in my life, having some creepy minister literally grab my arm and try to drag me away from my family, all while yelling about how it is God's law and all that crap. Sometimes I still have nightmares about it, but I am so glad it worked out in the end. I'm glad that creepy minister got arrested. I have moved out of that town since then, but sometimes I still go back to visit my family there. The church still exists, and from what I heard, the new minister's son now preaches there. They stopped doing the Wednesday services and only have service on Sundays and Christmas mornings. I've thought about going to the church again to talk to the new minister, but I cannot seem to get myself to do it, partly because of those old feelings I had back then come back. Anyways, that is my church drama story about that time I was almost married off at 14. And wow, Stacy, thank you so much for that, well, pretty awful but amazingly written story. And for the people in my community that still go to church, I am wondering, is your church open again or is it still closed due to COVID? How does your church handle the current pandemic? Let us know in the comments. And the last one is a very interesting story from user Mama-san on our own subreddit, and it is titled, "My father got nicknamed the Feather Merchant during Vietnam." Dad was a naval fighter pilot stationed on an aircraft carrier during Vietnam. When not in conflict, they required jets at the ready sitting in the catapults. As with any soldier in a boring, repetitive job, you start taking a few liberties with dealing with boredom. Now, back then, all on board ships got one feather pillow, a luxury. My dad also could sleep anywhere and would wake up instantly, fully alert. So one day he took his pillow into the cockpit so he could doze in comfort. He was able to do this for a while without any problem. However, one day the order came to launch the jets sitting hot in the catapults. My dad tossed the pillow out to a sailor on deck, but the sailor just tossed it back just as the cockpit shut into locked position. Before Dad could grab the pillow to secure it, the catapult launched and the pillow was slammed behind him. By the time they were recalled back to the ship, Dad had forgotten about the pillow. Now, pilots have big egos and Navy pilots would boast about carrier landings. The ships have 3 lines during Vietnam for the jet's hook to catch onto stopping the plane from overshooting or falling off. It did and still happens, and they tended to aim for the second line because first line was for cowards and third line was for stupid idiots. When Dad's turn to land came, he, according to him, made a perfect catch on the second line. However, the feather pillow had just been somewhere in the back of the cockpit. The abrupt stop sent it hurling to the front, where the impact caused it to explode. While Dad was being taxied to the lift for after-flight maintenance that all jets have, he opened the cockpit, causing the exploded feathers to begin trailing out. Over the ship's PA came the call, "And now arriving, the Feather Merchant." When Dad left the jet to walk to the briefing room, he met up with the other pilot that launched with him. The pilot thanked him for drawing attention away because he had been wearing big fuzzy house slippers. PS, Dad flew the F8. PPS, he also grounded the F8 when he proved that the wings flexed so much in a tight turn to cause the skin to impact an internal crank. Damn guys, I gotta say, I don't know about you, but I really enjoy these military stories. I actually would love to do an episode for only military stories, however, that is something that YouTube does not really appreciate, and I think my current audience does not really like them as much. Either way guys, thank you so much for listening, and a special thank you to all the people that still post stories on r/ripestories. I very much appreciate that, and from time to time I will still read them, of course. A lot of you are very talented at writing stories, and I really appreciate your effort. I gotta say, maybe in the next 1 or 2 months my housing situation will change a little bit and I will have more time for myself, so in return I will also have more time to read more of the ripe stories at the end of each video. Either way, thank you so much for watching, I hope you have a fantastic day and I see you again tomorrow.